This is the SONY ZV-E10 Mark II, and this is the SONY ZV-E10. Should you invest in a newer version of the SONY ZV series like this, or save your money and pick up the older version like this? To answer that, we will look at their differences from a real-world usability standpoint. I don't plan on diving deeply into the specs because when you're out in the field filming with these cameras, specs no longer matter. They're both great cameras until they hit their limitations. I like to see where their thresholds lie and try to hit those limitations so that you have all of the pros and cons to know which one of these two cameras is best for you. If you haven't had the opportunity to use either of these cameras and are interested in understanding how their video file sizes and clips will perform on your editing rigs, I have uploaded some free project files for you to download. Clips that have different frame rates and resolutions, along with their log profile shots, some videos shot in Program Auto, and some photography. This will enable you to compare your footage without YouTube's compression. I'll leave a link to that footage in the description. If you are, however, planning on picking up the ZV-E10 Mark II, I'm in the process of making a comprehensive course on how to set it up, how to use it in different lighting environments, and just how to get the most out of it. In fact, by the time you're watching this video, it may already be completed, so I'll leave a link to that course in the description. I'm going to treat this comparison as more of an actual use case type of video, and I'm going to focus on the usability and image quality out of both cameras. Can you tell the difference between these two shots? And as you try to figure it out, I'll tell you what we will be covering today. Today, we're going to look at their log profiles in different lighting environments, along with looking at their color fidelity when shooting in their standard color profiles. We will see how both cameras' sensors read out different skin tones in the normal color profile along with Cine2. We're going to see if both cameras are a good combination setup if we did an A-cam, B-cam setup to see how close their colors match up. We're going to look at when their images fall apart with less light and higher ISOs. We will look at their rolling shutter performance out of both cameras when using a telephoto lens. We're going to see if the handheld stabilization works better in the newer ZV-E10 Mark II compared to the older active stabilization in the ZV-E10. We were told that it is better. Let's find out. We're going to check on their temperature thresholds and see how fast both cameras heat up in different resolutions and frame rates, and see if either of these cameras overheat. We're going to test out the sharpness on both cameras for photography. We're going to recreate a natural habitat and shoot some macro shots because I hear that's becoming pretty popular nowadays, and macro shots are really fun to do and they let you see how well a camera will perform. We will do some overhead product shots as a content creator would if one of these were the only camera that they own. We are going to look at how both cameras handle green screens if you're someone who likes to do that. We're going to shoot with both cameras in Program Auto and switch it over to manual exposure to have more control. We're going to do some vlogging to see what that frame looks like and listen to their audio when we're using the native mics inside the cameras. We will be talking about which camera is for whom. We'll do some street photography, and I'll be sharing side-by-side videos all along the way. The APS-C lenses that we will be using for these comparisons are as follows. Both kit lenses, the 16-50 f3.5 to 5.6, as if this was the only lens that you could afford and you wanted to just go out and start shooting with them. The kit lens on the ZV-E10 Mark II is updated, by the way. The Viltrox 13mm f1.4 for some wide shots, for some vlogging, and to get some landscapes and skyscraper shots. The Tamron 17-70 f2.8 to test out the different skin tones as a documentary lens for my sharpness tests and for some vertical content. And the Sony 55-210, which is a telephoto lens f4.5 to 6.3 to get some of those telephoto shots and to test out that rolling shutter. The goal of this video is to give you clarity on not only what camera is right for you, but also to make a contrast between the ZV-E10 Mark II and the ZV-E10. We have a lot to cover today and not a lot of time, and I'd love for you to tell me which one of these two cameras you like better and why. All right, you ready? Let's go. I intermixed the way that I shot with both cameras, and I shot as if I was a beginner, not knowing anything about cameras and just pulling them out of the box and shooting with them purely in Program Auto exposure. And then, as an expert would, manually custom white balancing and pushing them both to their max. with manual exposure, along with using a bunch of different lenses and different apertures and just playing around with all of the different settings. And the reason I do that is so I can get these cameras to the point where their image starts to break down. I want this video to answer all of your questions, no matter where you are on the spectrum between beginner to expert. If you looked at both of those shots at the beginning of the video and you could correctly name which one was which, then you have a good eye. If it wasn't for the file names that I saw while I was editing this video, I may have not gotten any of those shots correctly, at least some of them. Some of them I definitely could tell the difference. If by the end of this video you are still undecided about which one of these two cameras is best for you, I made a free camera quiz that may help you get on the right track, and I'll leave that quiz in the description. Sony did send me the ZV-E10 Mark II on loan, but I do have to send it back and they are not paying me to make this video. This is purely my views from an unbiased standpoint. I have owned the ZV-E10 Mark I for over 3 years, and I've shot everything from client shots to YouTube videos to cinematic shots like this. In fact, a lot of you guys, my friends, may have found me from my ZV-E10 videos that I've put out over the past 3 years. Okay, let me break down the cost differences and when they were released. The ZV-E10 Mark II is an APS-C camera with a 26 megapixel sensor that can shoot in 10-bit, 4K up to 60 frames per second, in 422 all intra, and if you don't know what that means, I'll explain it later in this video. It can shoot in S-CINETONE, it weighs less than the ZV-E10 without batteries, and it has the same form factor as a dedicated vlogging camera. The ZV-E10 Mark I has a 24 megapixel sensor. It can shoot in 8-bit, 4K up to 30 frames per second, in 420, and weighs less than the ZV-E10 Mark II when both batteries are installed. The ZV-E10 Mark II starts at $999 US, body only, and $1,099 with the kit lens, and it was released in July of 2024. The ZV-E10 starts at $598 body only and $698 with the kit lens, and it was released in September of 2021. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, the kit lens that comes with the ZV-E10 Mark II is updated. So these are two different kit lenses, but they both add $100 to the total price when you buy the kit lenses with the cameras. All right, let's look at their bodies and their image quality. Let's start with the lenses. I made sure to use the same exact lenses with both cameras to ensure the accuracy of some of my tests and image comparisons. The reason why I did that is we need the same exact glass on the end of both cameras to compare the camera sensor sharpness, the color fidelity, and their autofocus systems before any light even hits their sensors to get accurate tests between both cameras. By the way, if you like videos like this one, make sure to like this video so I know to make more videos like this one. They have a similar body design and button and dial layout, but there are differences in where some of the essential functions are, like the on and off button. The on and off switch on the ZV-E10 Mark II is around the shutter button like we got with the Sony a6700. And the on and off switch on the E10 is on the top of the camera closer to the edge. Also, the mode button on the ZV-E10 Mark II is a physical switch, whereas the ZV-E10, it's just a button. I prefer the physical switch on the ZV-E10 as the on and off button so I don't accidentally turn it on and off. And I also prefer the physical switch of the mode button on the ZV-E10 Mark II because it's a lot easier to toggle between each mode than having to cycle through the entire thing. The buttons on the back of both cameras are the same, and I appreciated that because I already had muscle memory with the ZV-E10, so it made it a lot easier for me to pick up the ZV-E10 Mark II and just go out and start using it. I also set up the same exact shortcuts inside of the ZV-E10 Mark II that I had set with the E10, so I didn't have to fumble around with the menu settings while I was out in the field trying to find certain things. The ZV-E10 has a deeper and meatier grip, which makes it less likely for you to drop it and easier to handle, whereas the handle on the ZV-E10 is smaller and it has less of a grip, which makes it more likely that you may drop it. I still recommend you picking up a camera cage no matter what camera you decide to go with. A camera cage is a metal or plastic frame that is designed to surround and protect your camera. Camera cages also have extra mounting points so you can add things like external lights, external microphones, and an external monitor. But I mostly pick up cages to protect the camera. On paper, the display of the ZV-E10 Mark II will be easier to see with a 1.037 million dot touchscreen, whereas the ZV-E10 has 921,600. I can tell you from using both cameras in wildly different lighting environments, there wasn't much of a difference for me. But the fact that I could use the touchscreen to change exposure settings, my white balance, and custom set some menu shortcuts, it made it a lot easier to use on the ZV-E10 Mark II, especially when I was out in the field doing documentary run and gun type filming. The touchscreen on the Mark II has more functionality, as well as swiping capabilities, and a whole plethora of different customizations that you can do right there within the display. This means that I was able to customize the E10 Mark II a lot easier than I was with the E10 Mark I. However, if you've been with me for a while, you know that I always try to keep my fingers off of the display, because fingers on displays create grease and smudges that will make it harder to not only operate, but also to see when you're out in bright environments. If you do plan on using the touch display while you're out in the field filming, make sure to pack a camera cloth so you can constantly be wiping it off so that you don't have grease on the screen itself. If you haven't been following me a while, nice to meet you. I'm Joe. I talk about all different things camera related because I love pushing cameras to their limits. I'd love for you to join the Film Alliance by subscribing. Both cameras have the same exact ports, but the port doors are different. The ZV-E10 Mark II has a physical plastic door for the SD card, which you can house on the side. And then it also has those little floppy doors for the USB-C and mic and HDMI out and headphone, which to me feel like they could easily break off. Whereas the ZV-E10 has a nice solid plastic door on the side of it, along with one floppy door for the mic. Also, the SD card for the ZV-E10 installs where the battery is inserted at the bottom of the camera, whereas with the ZV-E10 Mark II, we get side loading, which I prefer because then if the camera's on a tripod, you don't have to take it off to remove the battery door to get your SD card out. As a side note, from user experience, I've used those little plastic doors in the past, and I even had them fall off eventually with me on my Sony a7 III. Now it's completely unguarded, so I really can't find myself in any type of wet and dusty environment. I would prefer nice solid plastic doors on the side that I can easily open and close, and that way I can ensure they won't ever break off. The USB-C port is for charging and image transfer. The mic input is there if you'd like to add your own audio inputs and up your audio game. And the headphone jack is great for not only monitoring your audio while you're out in the field, but also listening to your audio on playback while you're out in the field to make sure none of your audio was peaking. This way you can make sure all of your levels are in range and you don't have to re-record. And then we have HDMI out, which you can use to monitor your footage on an external monitor. When you press record on the ZV-E10 Mark II, it has a tally lamp that's on the left side or the right side, depending on which way you're looking at your camera. And the ZV-E10, the tally lamp is on the other side. But either way, both cameras have tally lamps, which is especially helpful when you can't see the display and you want to ensure that you are recording. We touched on the small size and weight of both cameras in the beginning, but the ZV-E10 Mark II weighs 377 grams with the SD card and battery installed, and the ZV-E10 weighs 343 grams with the SD card and the battery installed. But when you remove both batteries, the ZV-E10 Mark II somehow is less weight. The NP-FZ100 battery that's housed within the ZV-E10 Mark II is bigger and heavier than the NP-FW50 battery inside of the ZV-E10, but that means longer recording times. We will get into battery life and drain times later in the video, but for now, just know that the ZV-E10 Mark II's battery is better than the ZV-E10, even though it's heavier. The ZV-E10 Mark II has 10 creative looks, which I played around with and was pretty impressed with. I think Sony sees how popular creative looks are becoming with content creators, so they're really upping their creative looks game. You can also edit tons of different settings within the creative looks, whereas with the ZV-E10, you only get 7 different creative style presets, and there's only customization for contrast, saturation, and sharpness. These creative looks are different than picture profiles. Creative looks are predefined settings that adjust the color, contrast, and saturation to create a specific visual style or mood, such as vivid, portrait, sunset, black and white. These settings are designed to give your shots a certain look without requiring extensive post-processing. So you might say that these creative looks are created for beginners, but in my experience, I was having a lot of fun with them, and I think that you could do a lot of cool shots and stories with them. On the other hand, picture profiles are more advanced and allow you to manually adjust your parameters like gamma, black level, color depth, color correction, And picture profiles are often used by advanced videographers and photographers who want more granular control over their final image and plan to do post-production color grading. If you're into creative looks and not doing too much post-production editing, then the ZV-E10 Mark II would be the way to go because of its creative look presets. But both cameras do have picture profiles that you can use, like Cine-2, S-Log3, and ITU-709. But the ZV-E10 Mark II offers a newer picture profile that Sony cameras have been offering in the past 3 years, which is S-CINETONE. S-CINETONE is designed to produce natural colors with a gentle and smooth highlight roll-off. It's popular among video creators and content creators, YouTubers, because it delivers pleasing skin tones and good color rendition straight out of the camera without having to do too much post-production work. This can save a lot of time in post-production and provides a consistent and professional look to the footage. In fact, this video right now is being filmed in S-CINETONE with my A7S III, and whenever I do these headshots, I mainly shoot them in S-CINETONE. That way when I pass off my footage to my editors, they can just do a little bit of color grading and there's not a ton of work that needs to be done. So if you find yourself doing a lot of skin tone shooting and you need fast turnover, then I would go with the ZV-E10 Mark II because it has S-CINETONE, which delivers a very high image quality. But if you end up going with the ZV-E10, I created a custom picture profile that gives you an S-CINETONE look, and it can be applied to both cameras the same way to give you a great A-cam, B-cam setup where the colors will match up very closely. You don't want to film two different cameras in two different creative looks or two different picture profiles, because then when you go to edit that video, the colors will be different even though you're in the same scene. As you can see with this talking head shot, I'm using that custom picture profile, and both of my shots look very close together. I'll give you a formula for that custom picture profile in the description in case you're interested and you get both of these cameras and it's your A-cam, B-cam setup. The Mark II's menu system is newer and easier to navigate. The menu system on the ZV-E10 is older, and although some people have complained about it, I found it to be pretty easy to use after I got used to it. I do think that the newer menu system on the ZV-E10 Mark II is easier to navigate and use than the older system on the ZV-E10 though. The reason that this matters is time. If you don't want to be out in the field filming and trying to jump into your settings and try to figure out different things, then easier menu systems are better to have. For example, if I was in a situation where I was in a quiet environment and I wanted to turn this record chime off, I don't know if I would be able to find that very quickly on the ZV-E10, but I could find it pretty quickly on the ZV-E10 Mark II because its menu system is that much more intuitive. Camera menu systems that are easier to navigate and use are better for me and you because they allow for quicker access to important settings and options. There's nothing more frustrating when you see the shot coming and you try to get to your system settings really quickly and you can't find something and then you miss the shot. So intuitive menu systems are important because they reduce the chance of missing that important shot and they lead to a smoother and more efficient workflow. If you're an overall beginner, then I would go with the ZV-E10 Mark II because it will be easier to navigate and learn. If you're a vertical shooter, the ZV-E10 Mark II will also be your best bet because it can film vertically, which made it really nice to have the auto rotate option in the display so I could really see what my framing would look like in the full area of the display. One thing it is lacking that I wish it had, maybe the next one, is a quarter mount thread on this side of the camera without having to pick up a cage. That way you could mount it on a gimbal or a tripod like this. Although that's another reason to pick up a cage, so you could mount it like this and still shoot vertical. Both cameras do have background defocus and product showcase settings. Background defocus is a quick way to blur out your background without having to drop the aperture and raise the shutter speed manually. Product showcase mode is a mode that is designed for people who like to hold things in front of the camera and have it automatically focus on the subject in your hand rather than continuing to lock onto your face. The playback interface on the Mark II is also easier to use in my opinion because you can actually touch the screen to start and stop and move around, but you can't scrub along the timeline like you can with action cameras. So just be aware, which I was really hoping for because it makes scrubbing through the shots a lot easier. Whereas with the ZV-E10, you have to use the buttons for the playback, which is what I prefer, but I'm thinking about this from a beginner standpoint. It would be nice to be able to touch the screen and push play, especially nowadays with smartphones. Both cameras do have a crop in active stabilization mode. I believe it's around 1.4 to 1.5 times, somewhere around there. And when you shoot in 4K 60 with the ZV-E10 Mark II, you get an additional 0.1 times crop. So when you're in active stabilization and you're shooting in 4K 60, your crop's gonna be around 1.6 times. This may be a reason why you'd want to pick up something like the Viltrox 13mm f1.4, especially if you're vlogging. We were told that the stabilization in the Mark II was better than the ZV-E10, so I did a side-by-side comparison with different lenses and found that yes, it is much better. Although it's not the same stabilization that we get in the SONY ZV-E10, which looks close to gimbal-like footage, it's definitely a lot better than the ZV-E10 and very usable. I would still throw a gimbal on this camera if I wanted to get gimbal-like footage, or someone could always take the footage from the ZV-E10 Mark II and throw it through Catalyst Browse just to smoothen out that footage a little bit more. I don't like to use Catalyst Browse because it's just an extra step in workflow, but you could do that if you wanted to. Also, when you're shooting in 1080 120, just like every other Sony camera that I've shot with, active stabilization is no longer available, so just remember that. The ZV-E10 Mark II also has breathing compensation. Breathing compensation on the Mark II refers to a feature that minimizes changes in the angle of view that can occur while you're focusing. It's also known as focus breathing. This feature helps maintain a consistent composition when adjusting focus, which is especially helpful for content creators who want to avoid distracting shifts in framing during focus pulls. The Mark II has 759 autofocus points, and the E10 has 425 autofocus points. I could tell a subtle difference when it came to hand-holding both cameras and trying to focus on different things, but it wasn't too bad. It started to become pretty bad when I found myself in a low-light environment, so I found myself switching to manual focus with both cameras. All right, let's talk image quality. The ZV-E10 Mark II has the same sensor as the Sony a6700 and the Sony FX30. Think about the cost difference there for a second. The a6700 is a very popular Sony APS-C camera and it sells for $400 more. It does have a better AI processing chip, it has an EVF, and it can shoot in 4K 120. But it is very similar to the ZV-E10 Mark II. Let me know if you'd like me to make a comparison on these two cameras. And the FX30 is pretty similar in image quality to the ZV-E10, and this sells for $798 more US. It does have an internal fan, 5 extra mounting points, and more filmmaking capabilities, but still, you're getting a pretty good deal at that price point for the ZV-E10 Mark II. The ZV-E10 Mark II has 5.6K oversampling, whereas the ZV-E10 has 6K oversampling. I mentioned in the beginning of the video that the ZV-E10 Mark II can shoot in 10-bit 422 all-intra, and the ZV-E10 can shoot in 420 8-bit. An 8-bit camera can record 256 shades of red, green, and blue, resulting in a total of around 16.7 million colors. On the other hand, the 10-bit camera can shoot 1,024 shades of red, green, and blue, achieving a total of over a billion colors. This means that a 10-bit camera will offer way better color depth and smoother color gradients compared to 8-bit cameras, which results in higher quality and more detailed images, especially in post-processing and color grading like when we're shooting in log. And when I say 422 all-intra video recording, that means each frame is compressed independently without any interframe compression. In real-world usability, this can result in higher color accuracy and better image quality compared to other compression methods. In a nutshell, the ZV-E10 Mark II will have a better image quality than the ZV-E10, but for casual shooters, you may not see much of a difference. Like I mentioned, there are actually shots here that I would not be able to tell a difference, and found that to be the case mainly when we were in uncontrolled lighting environments and I had both cameras in program auto. You really start to see a difference when you use manual exposure settings on both cameras and the lighting environment is not so crazy harsh with bright lights. When I'm out in the field and I'm shooting in manual exposure, I can tell a difference because I do this every single day. I love this stuff and I love shooting with 10-bit cameras. So I much prefer 10-bit because that means my colors will look more realistic, I won't have as much image quality fall off in low light conditions, and I will minimize the amount of banding that I'll get in the skies. But if I asked my mom if she could see a difference, let's just say she'd probably love either of the shots I showed her and wouldn't see any difference. Rolling shutter has always been the bane of the ZV-E10's existence, so I was hoping it was going to get better with the ZV-E10 Mark II, and thankfully I'm here to report that it was much better. Although it's still there, you can still see rolling shutter, especially when we use that telephoto lens. It definitely wasn't as jello-y as the ZV-E10. In fact, it was the same as the Sony a6700, but that makes sense because it's the same sensor that comes out of the a6700. Both cameras have a burst rate of 11 frames per second, and both have APS-C sensors. The difference is the ZV-E10 Mark II has more megapixels, coming in at 26 megapixels, whereas the ZV-E10 has 24 megapixels. As long as I was using the same exact lenses and exposing both cameras about the same. I think either one of these cameras would be great for photography if that's what you're into. But the edge goes to the ZV-E10 Mark II because it does have 3 different modes for focusing on different subjects: humans, animals, and birds. And you can select one of those 3 right from the display without having to dive into the menu system. Both cameras can shoot in log or S-Log3. S-Log3 is a picture profile, a gamma curve setting that is designed to capture a wide dynamic range. It allows you to retain more highlight and shadow details in high contrast areas, giving you more flexibility in color grading when you get to post-production. This setting is commonly used in filmmaking because it's easier to grade your footage to make it look all the same throughout the entire clip, rather than having your colors baked in, having to wrestle with those colors. The ability of the ZV-E10 Mark II to have 10-bit and shoot in 4:2:2 all-intra really shines when it comes to log shooting. I found that when we were in the studio, and even in real-world situations, I was able to push and pull the log footage colors way more with the Mark II over the ZV-E10. The Mark II also has assignable user LUTs, so you're able to create your own custom LUTs and upload them straight to the camera to see what your footage looks like in camera while shooting in log. The ZV-E10, you have to sort of guess what your shot will look like when you're exposing for log. But don't worry if you own the ZV-E10, because both cameras have Gamma Assist. And Gamma Assist is a function that you can turn on while you're shooting in log, which can help you get a more accurate representation of the final colors and contrast of your video. This can be really useful for beginners who are learning about color grading and want to see the potential impact of their adjustments in real time. The ZV-E10 Mark II is advertised to have 14 stops of dynamic range, and you can really see it while you're shooting in log. Kind of piggybacking off of the log footage out of both cameras, I used to think that the 8-bit ZV-E10 wouldn't be that great for green screen work, especially when we compare it to 10-bit camera like the ZV-E10 Mark II. But that's when I used to not do too much green screen work, so I didn't really understand how to do it. I used to find that even after keying the image, you could still see a little bit of green on the edge of the outside of whatever I was green screening. But now, years later, I realized that that's all in the way that you light your subject and how you light your green screen's background. If you do not balance your lighting across the green screen properly, you're not going to get a very good green screen. So anyways, I found that the ZV-E10 Mark II's 10-bit footage is better for green screen work, but not by much. If I got the ZV-E10, I would absolutely use it for green screen work. As I already mentioned, the ZV-E10 Mark II has the same exact sensor as the a6700 and FX30. The FX30 has a dual native ISO of 800 and 2500 when shooting in S-Log3. So that tells me that the ZV-E10 Mark II also has a dual native ISO of 800 and 2500. So when I'm filming with the Mark II, I never take my ISO above 2500, at least I try not to, and I try to stay at 800 if possible. The ZV-E10 has one base ISO at 100, so I try to never take it above 800 because that's just how I've always done it. But when I was doing these low light tests, I really started to notice that the image actually started to fall apart to become unusable when we hit ISO 3200 for both cameras. Tell me what your thoughts are and see if you can see the noise that I was seeing in the shadows. I switched both cameras into 4K 24 and I put a 128GB card in both cameras. I turned their stabilization off and I opened up their displays to see how hot they would get over a continuous period of time of recording. As you can see, in the first 5 minutes, the Mark II started to get hotter than the Mark I by 2 degrees. And then by the 20-minute mark, it was 5 degrees hotter than the E10. And it kind of just stayed that range apart all the way up until we got to that 45-minute mark. Neither camera overheated on me during this test because we were shooting in 4K 24, and this camera didn't overheat because it's an 8-bit camera. This camera got more hot than this camera because it's a 10-bit camera. But just for the heck of it, I wanted to see if the Mark II would overheat like the Sony a6700. When we put it into XAVC SI 4K, we were shooting in 60 frames per second, which is 422 10-bit, 600 megabits. And this revealed a different story. The camera got up to 124 degrees in 20 minutes, and then it shut down at the 23-minute mark. Then it took an hour for it to get back to room temperature, and a lot of people complained that this was the same case with the Sony a6700, overheating with these exact settings in about the same exact amount of time. And I'll tell people the same thing that I did with the Sony a6700 when they were kind of nervous about picking this camera up because of overheating. And as long as you shoot in XAVC HS 4K, 4K 60, 420 10-bit, you won't have any overheating issues, and the image quality difference will be very small. Also, let's not forget that this is a test unit, so maybe the actual units that they sell when it hits the markets will be different than the tests that I did here in the studio. Also, if you did want to shoot in 422 10-bit for longer than 23 minutes, then you could get a cooling fan like this Ulanzi cooling fan. And when I tested this fan out, I could shoot indefinitely in 422 10-bit without any overheating on my a6700. If you're a ZV-E10 owner or user, then you have nothing to fear, because no matter what I did, I could not get this camera to overheat. It's probably because it's an 8-bit camera, like I mentioned. Also, let's not forget that this camera body is so small and it packs such a powerful punch. It's not surprising to me that it overheats when shooting in that highest image quality possible. That's just one of the downsides to having such a small form factor. Whenever I shoot in 422 10-bit with my A7S III, it never overheats, but the body itself is probably 3 times this size. So there's downsides and upsides to having smaller bodies. Please let me know if there's another camera out there that's this small that can shoot in 422 10-bit up to 4K 60 with no overheating issues and no internal or external accessory cooling fan. I'd love to know. When it comes to the battery drain exhaust test, the ZV-E10 Mark II's bigger battery really shines here because it only burned 30% of its battery during that 45-minute video clip. The Mark I burned 52% battery, which means you won't get as much battery life with the Mark I. With that said, you could buy third-party batteries with the ZV-E10 Mark I for a lot cheaper than you could buy third-party batteries with the ZV-E10 Mark II. Both 45-minute clips were 35 gigabytes in storage size. And when I cleared the SD cards and switched the resolution to 1080-120, the Mark II had a duration of 2 hours and 17 minutes, and the Mark I had a duration of 2 hours and 32 minutes. This is the benefit of shooting with 8-bit cameras, because you'll have more filming time. When I switched them both over to 4K 24, the Mark II had 2 hours and 37 minutes, and the Mark I had 2 hours and 32 minutes. I don't know why that is, that's just what it read. The ZV-E10 Mark II has a better audio mic system because it can change mic directivity from front to rear and even to auto. This is nice for people who want complete control over their audio source and what it's picking up along the way. But you be the judge on which one you think sounds better in different noise environments in real-world applications. Both cameras do have intelligent hot shoes on the top, which you can hook up a Sony mic that's compatible with these particular hot shoes and get better audio without having a wire go into your microphone ports on the side. All right, so we're vlogging right now with the ZV-E10 Mark II using the native mic with this camera. Now we're vlogging with the Sony ZV-E10 Mark I. I want to see if that old active stabilization is worse off than the newer active stabilization on the ZV-E10 Mark II. One of the things that you want to do when you're trying to figure out if you want to vlog or not is, if you don't know the situation that you might find yourself in different lighting environments. This is what it would look like and this is what it would sound like. I have the lens all the way back to 16 millimeters and I do have active stabilization on. I do have the kit lens on, and if I was just wanting to vlog with it, this is how it would look. The ZV-E10 Mark II also has cinematic vlog set, where it bakes in the bars on the top and the bottom of the display, and it gives you an aspect ratio of 2:35:1 and a frame rate of 24 frames per second. Cinematic vlog mode gives you 5 different looks with 4 different moods. If you'd like for me to make a video on how you could use this function to make some really cool looking cinematic shots, then let me know in the comments. I think the ZV-E10 Mark II is a great value camera, and I prefer it over the ZV-E10. I love that it has better stabilization, it can shoot in 10-bit up to 4K 60, it has a thicker grip, and it's crazy that it weighs less than the ZV-E10 without batteries installed. I do think people are going to complain about the overheating issue, but it's a non-issue for me because I shoot in 420 10-bit. I don't shoot continuously in 4K 60 for anything. I also wouldn't pick up the white one because I'm not that gentle with my cameras, and when I'm in a run and gun situation, I could easily see the white becoming pretty dirty pretty fast. So unless you're a very clean person, I would say pick up the black one. The benefit to having the ZV-E10 is the file sizes will be smaller, your media won't fill up as fast, but you're still going to get an incredible APS-C sensor image, which would be better than any smartphone. The stabilization on the E10 is not that good, but you could always invest in a gimbal and a nice lens and have an incredible setup. Don't forget that no matter what camera you end up purchasing, it's not about the camera, but the person behind it. So the more you learn about exposure, how to use your camera, the composition, and ultimately how to tell a story, no matter what camera you decide to go with, you'll do just fine. Also, your camera is only as good as the glass on the end of it. So make sure you're budgeting for some good glass no matter which camera you end up going with. The Tamron 17 to 70mm lens is an unbelievable lens that would work good with either of these cameras. In fact, I could use this lens as a documentary lens, as my main vertical content creator lens, and even as my headshot lens here in the studio. The image out of this Tamron lens is going to be so much better than the image out of the kit lens, so just keep that in mind when you decide on which camera you want to pick up. I would actually pick up the ZV-E10 with the Tamron 17 to 70 lens over the ZV-E10 Mark II with the kit lens. That's how much better your image would be with the better lens, and I hope I was able to show you that throughout this video with all of those different comparison clips and the full screen shots. All right, so please let me know if I covered everything in this video and which one of these two cameras you like better and why. See you soon.